All right, it is 8 o'clock on a nice, lovely Sunday afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is, anywhere around. So let's go ahead and get things started, shall we? Welcome back to our third reading from Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. In our first two, we've sort of met all the cast of characters and crew. We've started to see some of the backstories and the interests that have been developing between the characters and their histories, and how things are starting to really shape up and come together. And we're starting to see some escalation in some action, as well as a little bit of steam coming out. Um, so the things are starting to catch interest, and we'll see things start to catch fire as we go on. Um, we've seen all sorts of different influences, and yes, there's been some tropes, but they've been played out in ways that sort of twist expectations. So while it's themes and ideas that you might be familiar with, they play out in ways that hook your interest and keep you wanting to read. So I've been very excited for this weekend to get through more of this book, and so we'll continue and get just a little bit more. Well, so I've got a little bit of a thunderstorm around here. We'll see if the weather cooperates. It seems like it's mostly passed, but if we have a little bit of stuttering, feel free to just let me know in chat. I'll usually catch on relatively quickly if we've got some YouTube side issues. But I think we should be alright to just plow right ahead. So, with that, let's go ahead and resume our reading with the third day, starting from chapter 11. Oh, and before I get back into it, the author should still be around in chat, so if you have any questions or want to comment or lavish praises, feel free in chat to interact and have fun amongst yourselves. I'll chime in between chapters. I try not to interrupt myself unless I really get sort of stun locked. So I'll leave you guys to it. So, alright, let's go ahead and resume our reading now from chapter 11. Magic and science are so much more similar than they first appear, both having endless mysteries. Angel poked her head into the medical bay for the third time that day to see who was there. Fortunately, for the first time in hours, it was just Maya. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward for what was going to be a profoundly uncomfortable conversation. She had spent several hours the previous night with Lark, and they relished the simple pleasure of each other's company. He had confessed he was uncertain about his life given the recent events, which gave her an odd sense of relief that they had that in common. "Angel, what can I help you with?" Maya asked, her voice laced with concern. She stepped away from her microscope and approached the junior crew member. I have something to talk to you about, and I need it to be kept between us." Angel mumbled and continued to search around as though Reynard and Bastien might leap from behind a counter and shout, "Surprise!" "All right," Maya said encouragingly as she waited for her to continue. "Well, you know how we need to check in and report to you about any physical contact with other races?" Angel's face was hot, and she could feel her anxiety thrumming through her body like a hive of insects. I mean, not physical contact, like that kind, but more the kissing and hugging kind. Not that I'm against the other stuff, but I'm not ready, and we're not ready for it. Oh, what am I doing? She ran her hands over her fire-red cheeks and felt as though she were about to burst. Maya's eyes widened in surprise. This was the last person on the ship she expected to have this conversation with, her husband included. Practicing her doctor's composure, she expertly kept her expression calm, while inside she was both shocked and amused. "Lark and I kissed," Angel blurted out, and the momentum of her words picked up speed. "It was spontaneous, completely unplanned, and I'm still trying to sort it out in my head, but I think it might happen more." Her mouth snapped shut, and her eyes were wide, as though she was surprised by the confession as well. Maya gave a kind smile and patted the younger woman on the shoulder. "It's all right, Angel. They're the same species as we are, albeit with some peculiarities. I don't see any problem with you having any relations, intimate or otherwise. So, if anything more happens, you don't have to report it to me." Angel sighed loudly in relief, knowing she wouldn't have to share every detail of what might happen in her personal life. Her face was even returning to a standard shade. It was just so sudden, and I don't even understand why I still want it. Maya couldn't help but laugh at the crestfallen junior crew member. "Feelings don't always make sense, dear. We can spend our lives trying to tell ourselves we want one thing, but when someone special comes along, we can't help what our heart wants." "But he can be so frustrating," Angel groaned. He's sweet and funny, but he has this strange ability to say just the right things to make me want to challenge, smack, or apparently kiss him." She pressed her hands against her face and took a few deep breaths. Maya opened her arms and waited patiently for permission or denial. A second later, Angel stepped forward and accepted the motherly embrace of her medical officer. "That sounds similar to how I felt about Akron when I met him," Maya remarked as she stroked Angel's long hair. Angel studied Maya with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "It does? But you two get along so well." Maya sighed wistfully. "We do. But when someone connects with you on that deep of a level, they can make your heart soar as well as make you angry as no one else can. We're much more evened out than when we were younger, but even now, occasionally, he'll say something that can get a reaction out of me. Having that shortcut to my heart also means he knows the best ways to keep it safe. Angel's mind raced with the possibilities and implications of what Maya told her. The doctor's kind words and reassurance made her feel as though she might be able to sort it out on her own. I think I might come back if I feel lost again, Angel said tentatively, smiling at the older woman. My door is always open, Angel, and don't worry. This stays just between us, Maya reaffirmed as she pulled away and watched her leave. Once again alone, Maya went to her microscope and tried to continue her research. However, after some time, she had to admit defeat for now. Despite her steady progress, she found herself unable to focus, and instead kept thinking of the sudden changes this strange world and Lark had brought to their lives. But most of all, she thought about how difficult it would be to keep the recent conversation from her husband. Lark, if we are going to be traveling together, it's important that you're honest with us, Akron addressed in a tone that was equal parts friendly and unsettling. Lark looked up from his plate, concerned about what he meant. The two had just finished a meal together in the captain's quarters, after spending most of the afternoon talking about tactics and the Forerunner's role in helping the Stone Talons. For example, how you sent us the message about Idora, Akron continued, taking a long drink of water as he watched Lark's reaction. Akron had suspected he was the nameless messenger since he had come aboard. After observing his behavior in Sosaria against the Council and their laws, he was certain. Lark sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the piece of meat that was speared on his fork. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he took a deep breath and inclined his head for Akron to continue. Akron cracked a grin and tilted back in his chair. How did you manage it without being discovered? Simple text transmissions are never used anymore, Lark answered with a shrug, so I was counting on them only checking my video and audio transmissions. You still took a big risk, Akron folded his arms. Compared to the possibility of Adura or Vamid getting their hands on your ship, it was nothing, he replied, solemnly. That so-called law makes us no better than thieves and slavers, and I refuse to be a part of it. Have you done that often, going against direct orders? Akron asked as he refilled both of their cups. Yes, Lark said as he took another drink. Sometimes. I've had conflicts for years since joining the Archblades, so it's nothing new to me. Is it because Darkos is your biological father? Again, Akron watched Lark carefully. Lark choked on his drink, but Akron patiently waited for him to catch his breath and handed him a napkin. You really were serious about being honest, Lark muttered, wiping his chin. Then again, I suppose I should have told you since you were bound to find out in Sosaria. You're right about that. We all saw how they treated you, so I confronted Cassandra about it, and she showed us your first contact with him. It was quite a show to watch, Akron said, visibly impressed. Lark's lips pulled back in a grimace at the memory. It was a stupid thing to do. I should have just told him to leave me alone, but no, I had to go and threaten him and lay out my dream of destroying the Conclave right there. He groaned, setting his fork down. He pushed his plate away. He wasn't hungry anymore. Well, you don't have to worry about us. It makes no difference to the crew who your father is, and it doesn't change what you have done for us, Akron reassured firmly, leaving no room for doubt on the subject. I appreciate that, a lot. For years, I've always... Wait, you said us? Does Angel know? He asked with a sudden hint of panic in his voice. Yes, she watched the recording with Lauren and me. Is that a problem? Akron queried with a raised brow. No, of course not. I just... Lark stammered before he was, thankfully, interrupted by a knock at the door. Akron went to a small inset panel and pressed a button that caused the door to slide open. His frame eclipsed whoever was in the hallway, but the excited voice was already all too familiar to Lark. The captain stood aside, and Angel entered the room as though she had been summoned by the conversation. Her eyes were glued to the datapad in her hands. Sir, I wanted your permission to conduct some experiments in the drive room. She glanced up and met Lark's eyes. She flashed him a shy smile before turning to the captain. Have I come at a bad time? Not at all, crewwoman. I was just talking to our friend about the riveting recording we saw in Sosaria, Akron replied. Her eyebrows raised, but Lark gave a resigned sigh. I was an emotional kid, struggling to deal with an impossible situation, he said. Really? We must have seen a different recording than I saw then, because I saw a young man facing an enemy with rage in defense of the parents he loved, she said, dated determinately. Lark shifted awkwardly in his chair, unsure what to say. Although he was flattered by her words, he was still wrestling with the realization that the entire ship knew about his origins. It rarely ended well, no matter what they might say to reassure him. What kind of experiments do you want to do? Akron asked, attempting to steer the conversation elsewhere. Lark and I have some ideas about my energy frequency theories, and we wanted to experiment with our spare drive prism, she explained and showed him her pad. It was filled with lines of complex data, some of which he recognized instantly, and others took considerably more time to decipher. Akron winced internally. He almost said no on the basis that the risk to the prism would be too great, but he didn't want to discourage her when her research had already been so beneficial to them so far. All right, he relented, after a long moment to weigh the pros and cons. Just be careful. That's our only spare, and if both break, it'll be a long ride home. I will, sir. I promise, she reassured emphatically. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she turned her focus to Lark. I'm available now if you two are almost finished. Go ahead and make sure Dravik knows what you were doing. You know how he gets if anyone messes with those prisms, Akron warned, with a wave to dismiss the pair. Angel saluted her captain and practically dragged Lark down the hallway to the drive room. Akron scratched his beard and watched their retreating backs while wondering what was happening between them. The second floor of the drive room was an ample space, with a cordoned-off section in the center that provided a view of the Nova Drive. This floor was mostly a workspace where one could tinker, but also keep an eye on the engine in case something went wrong. The wall was covered in diagrams and formula, much of which Lark noted was in Angel's penmanship. They were on the floor with a special testing chamber between them. The spare energy prism was easily 2 meters long and half a meter wide. She plugged her pad into the chamber's interface and measured the reactions inside as she bombarded the prism with trace amounts of energy. Lark sat across from her and watched in fascination for signs of a reaction. In a way, I wanted to tell you sooner, he admitted, but it's a hard topic to breach, you know? I understand, but it does explain some things, she said. How so? His crimson eyes glanced up at her, and she saw the apprehension in them. Your fighting ability, to start with. You said that it's different from your comrades. Training with Darien accounts for a lot, but your origins would explain the rest, she replied. She pressed a button on her pad that caused the prism in the chamber to rotate slightly and refract the energy differently. Unfortunately, it still did not produce a tangible result. Angel bit her lower lip as she thought about her next words carefully. Finally, she looked directly at him and asked, You can use entropy magic, can't you? His gaze dropped to the readout for the chamber. A long minute of silence passed, and Angel wondered if she had pushed too far. Just as she was about to apologize for asking, he quietly answered, Yes, I inherited it from him. How do you know? Have you ever used it? Angel inquired. She set her pad on the floor to give Lark her full attention, out of respect and genuine curiosity. No, I would never do that, Lark answered it vehemently. I'm not accusing you of raising the dead or creating monsters, Lark, Angel gently reassured him. It's a part of you, but it doesn't make you a bad person. Lark exhaled loudly and leaned against the console behind him. He closed his eyes and ran a hand over his face. I'm really not comfortable talking about this. Oh, is the topic outside your comfort zone? She smirked, resting her chin on her palm, and pointedly waited for a response. He nodded emphatically, but then froze. His eyes snapped open and then narrowed as he shot her a vexed look. He felt shame and irritation, but also amusement, and all of it was focused on her. I walked into that, didn't I? He chuckled dryly. Angel flashed him a cheeky grin. She was relieved that her question didn't drive him away. Yes, you did, and what you told me before applies to you here as well. You have to deal with your personal discomfort for the benefit of others. I can accept that, but what will this accomplish? He asked defeatedly. Nothing good has ever come from entropy magic. Angel sat up on all fours and watched intently as she crawled towards him. When she was close enough to touch, she sat back and gave his cheek a gentle kiss. Just talk to me. You said before you never gave any thought to your abilities. You never know. We might figure something out together. Lark rested his forehead against hers. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her onto his lap. After a long moment of silence, he at last whispered, All right. What do you want to know? She took his hand in hers and squeezed it. You have this power, but you never use it. How can you tell it's there? When I fight, Lark began quietly, I feel magic coursing through my body. When it is destroying the Conclave's creatures or helping people, it manifests as essence magic. However, I feel something else too. Something dark lingers under the surface and is fueled by rage and the desire to destroy. His voice shook, as though he were wrestling with the unseen force as they spoke. So, the stronger your desire to help and defend others, the stronger your manifestation of essence magic is. Conversely, the stronger your need to destroy, the stronger your manifestation of entropy magic becomes. She pondered and summarized a theory as she spoke. Sounds to me as they are both powered by passion. How do you figure that from what I said? Lark asked skeptically as he watched intently. Angel's cheeks flushed pink at how he looked as though he was burning through her with his gaze. You're one of the most passionate people I've ever met, Lark. Despite having a hard life because of your lineage and being mistreated by those around you, you never stopped being a staunch defender of Cesaria, its people, and even those outside your territory. Your mother and father sound like they were the same way. I've seen it through how you talk, how you fight, and even how you kiss. Your determination and passion for your cause must power your magic. Lark rested his hand on Angel's back, and she could practically hear his mind working. That would help explain why Darkos is so powerful. He is obsessed with conquering our world, and despite being set back countless times, he relentlessly fights on. How does one learn to use entropy magic? She inquired. A tick tugged on Lark's left cheek as he frowned, but he was again set on pushing past his discomfort. You must go through a ritual. They pull the part of you out that is good and righteous, so they can destroy and reshape it. They cut off your ability to ever use essence magic again, but those who go through the ritual believe they have access to a greater power. It seems as though the Conclave would never divulge their secrets, so how does anyone know what these rituals are? Angel practically whispered, burrowing herself in Lark's arms as though greatly troubled. In order to grow their numbers, they have been known to force the transition on others, he explained, feeling disconcerted. They would sometimes grab entire families, slaughter the non-magic wielders, and change the rest. Either because they now lacked the empathy to care, or because they felt they had no option, the newly formed necromancers either fell in line or were killed. Occasionally, one of the family members would escape and tell the rescuers what happened. It didn't matter, though. Once a person uses entropy magic, there is no going back. His pained voice sent a chill down her spine. In an attempt to comfort him, she ran her fingers along his arm. Her heart sank as she imagined the implications of such a ritual. Suddenly, her hand froze, and she took a sharp breath. How did Darkos get his power? She asked abruptly. What? Lark stared down at her in confusion. Well, you told us he started the Conclave, which means he would have been one of the pioneers of entropy magic. How did the first necromancers get their power if no others were around to perform the ritual? She stood from his grasp to stretch her legs. My mother told me that Darkos first learned to use entropy magic through years of study and research. Adura did the same. Adura, is that evil without the entropy ritual? Angel asked as a shudder ran up her spine. I told Lauren as much. A special kind of evil. He put a hand on hers. But why does this matter? It isn't important how someone learns to use entropy magic. It's still evil and wrong. I don't think it is, Angel held up a finger. If entropy and essence magic are truly two sides of the same power, then I don't think they are inherently good or evil. Lark sighed, exasperated, and stared up at the ceiling. Angel, I appreciate your ideas and theories, but I've been around these forces my entire life. There is no question in my mind that entropy magic is evil. Like I said before, essence magic is powered by defending others, and entropy magic is powered by the need to kill. How are those not obviously good and evil? He rose suddenly and kept his gaze leveled at her. His eyes held a silent challenge. She felt her anxiety rising, but stayed rooted to the spot and refused to back down from him. Because anyone can have a base desire to defend others and to destroy, she explained. Lark folded his arms, but remained silent. Those needs aren't inherently good or evil. One can be driven to destroy a terrible enemy in the name of righteousness, and that same person could defend someone else or their own beliefs for evil reasons. His expression remained passive. The explanation hadn't sunk in, but at least he wasn't arguing further. Can Advisor Vamid use essence magic? Angel asked abruptly. Lark snorted hard and gave her a wry smile. Yes, he's not very skilled at it, but he was a healer before he moved to politics. Well, he didn't strike me as a righteous person, she began emphatically, her hands clenched at her side. And you said Darkos was a great hero before he started the Conclave, which means he was probably a good person at one point. Then there's you, born with entropy magic, yet it hasn't corrupted you. Lark blinked as her words finally hit home. He tilted his head to study her intensely. How do you do that, Angel. Do what? She replied, bewildered. Find a way to say something that completely turns my reality on its head and makes me rethink everything I've ever believed. He murmured as he caressed her cheek. Just as he opened his mouth to say more, his gaze snapped to the prism, still slowly rotating. I felt that, he exclaimed. What? Felt what? Angel asked, confused as he knelt by the chamber. Something in there resonated and felt familiar to magic. He closed his eyes, carefully reliving the past few seconds. Earth magic. I'm certain of it. She rushed over and picked up her pad to stop the prism, and with the push of a button, the rotation resumed in the opposite direction at a much slower rate. Her brow furrowed, reading the numbers. There are countless possible energy signatures that could come from this. Are you sure that... There! Stop! Lark interrupted, and Angel immediately halted the rotation once more. He set his left hand on the casing, and his hand began to glow a deep amber color. The chamber rattled and shook as the fractured energy that came from the crystal morphed to match. Incredible, Angel gasped, her pad forgotten. This must be the exact frequency used by Earth magic. She tore her eyes from the spectacle to look at him with wonder. What is Earth magic used for? It can be used to harden metals, create armor from stone and ores, and it's also used to shape ground formations, he responded excitedly. This frequency will make Earth magic compatible with our ship and systems, Angel breathed, her heart racing with the implications of her discovery. And if we can calibrate it right, we might be able to use it to greatly enhance our defenses. More than that, Lark continued, if we can find this frequency, we can find it for air, water, fire, and maybe even essence magic. Angel closed the distance between them and practically tackled him with a fierce embrace, hugging and kissing him in a frenzy. Her mind was ablaze with the possibilities of what could be done with this kind of research, and what else they could discover together. That brings us to the end of Chapter 11. The exchange with Maya and Angel was fun. Trying to catch the timidness, but the excitement bubbling up out of Angel, and the gentle motherly care of watching her come out of her shell from Maya. That was a fun little exchange there. And then Ocran grilling Lark, and I'm sure Ocran is wise to something. That dynamic is kind of hard to miss, I'm sure. So that was a fun chapter. It's not a whole lot of action, but there's some development of the consequences of the previous chapter and the characters' reactions. And then at the last segment there, we saw the research playing out. So we were getting some development there. So it turned out very nicely. So let's carry on with Chapter 12. We can try to prevent violence in any way possible, but too often we are given no choice. Ocran stood in front of the entire crew in the mess hall. A meeting had been called to go over the plans for their arrival at the Stone Talons, and he wanted to make sure everyone was entirely up to date on the vital information. We should be arriving there in 3 hours, which puts us there roughly at 2 a.m. ship time. He held up his pad to display a holographic image depicting the massive settlement that was the target. The entire city is carved into the largest mountain. The southern entrance is the only one fully accessible on foot, and is where the army must attack. He turned to Lark, who confirmed with a nod. They will send their ground troops against the front gates. Soon after, blood hunters will be dispatched to try to take out any commanders, specialists, or mages, Lark added. After a few seconds of hesitation, he continued. However, there haven't been reports of rot giants, and that bothers me. Is something wrong? That should be good news, Angel inquired. Normally, yes, but the Stone Talons are the most defensible position on Durance. It doesn't make sense that Conclave would leave their siege units home for the attack, he explained. We'll just have to see for ourselves when we get there, Ocran concluded. What kind of defense do the Stonekin have? I asked. They have battle armor and tanks, powered by energy crystals, Lark motioned to the holographic image. It makes them a dangerous force on the ground, and hard to kill. Our plan is to provide cover fire for anyone trying to escape the fighting. We won't attack the invading army directly, but we can come to the Stonekin's aid, and provide medical assistance if we're able. Ocran gestured to his side. Lark will engage the army, and assist the defenders. Hopefully, if we all survive this, we can make some new friends and figure out what to do next. The crew nodded in unison, a thick layer of tension hanging in the air. I'll be on the bridge. Angel has volunteered to keep an eye on the drive room so the rest of you can get some rest before we arrive. I want all hands ready at battle stations at a moment's notice. Understood?" Grim faces betrayed their affirmations, and with salutes to their captain, the crew dispersed. Tarn had brought out a platter of food with pitchers of juice. Akron put his pad back in its holster and went to grab a bite to eat. Maya, Dravik, Lily, Reynard, and Bastion took refreshments and then headed to their quarters. Lauren left for the bridge for another long shift. Seeing Akron alone, Lark made a beeline for him. His voice dropped low, and he asked, "You realize that the Bloodhunters will most likely be coming for your ship as well, right?" "Will they? I didn't consider that. Maybe our being there might also serve as a distraction," Akron responded casually, taking another bite. Lark wanted to be honest about how much more the Forerunner could do in the battle, but he knew Akron and the crew were already walking a razor-thin line to adhere to their laws. Instead, he grabbed a pair of drinks and returned to his seat across from Angel. Reynard was saying how excited he was for the fight, she remarked as she took her drink. "He's been eager to blow up monsters since we first started seeing them." Lark sat across from her. "I know the feeling. It's frustrating to have to hold back." Angel nudged him with her toe and jokingly asked, "When have you ever held back?" Lark tugged into a humorless grin and replied, when I was in the Great Hall back home, I was greatly restrained." She reached over and ran her thumb along the inside of his wrist as he held his healed palm. "Have you ever been in a fight like this before?" The anxiety in her voice was almost palpable. "Honestly, no. They sent a large force against us some years ago, but it was targeted at outlying villages and settlements. It was more spread out. There were many more soldiers to take them on." Lark answered softly. Suddenly, he cleared his throat and beamed. However, it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry about me, though. I've killed thousands of these things, and they rarely touch me. You worry about helping make sure things run smoothly here, and afterwards, we can start researching the other elemental frequencies." The conversation dwindled until they both stared at their cups and occasionally looked up to the other with concern etched on their features, and soon they returned to the drive room. As she stared at his back in the hallway, her mind tried to distract herself with plans for the coming work together, but her fears kept her thoughts returning to the coming battle each time. The hatch was open, and the frigid night air whipped through Lark's hair and chilled his face. As he gazed into the endless black ground below him, he saw that the battle had already started. His strider sat idly in the far corner of the cargo bay. Although he wrestled with the idea of leaving it behind, the complete freedom of movement on foot was far more critical, and his own magic and sword would outclass the strider in a close-quarters fight. The communicator armlet on his wrist chirped to alert him that they were at the appropriate altitude for him to jump. Lark rolled his shoulders and calculated that the distance between him and the ground was about the height of 3 buildings. He wasn't afraid. He knew his air magic would slow his fall and keep him safe. Safe, he thought to himself. His mind went to the crew of the Forerunner and the woman he had started to care about deeply. In a way, he wished he could stay on board in case anything happened, but their risk was much smaller than the people down there. He shook his head and mentally scolded himself for getting distracted. As the lights from the dwellings ahead came into focus, he saw the creatures already assaulting the city. Thankfully, it looked as though the battle had only recently begun. There was still plenty of time to drive the conclave back and save as many lives as possible. Taking a final breath and channeling his magic, he stepped back and took a running leap off the ship to the battle below. "He's off," Akron announced, and closed the hatch with the push of a button. "All right, Lauren, I want us another 20 meters higher and camped right above the outer wall. Angel will give us the targets, and Reynard will prioritize who needs our help. And most importantly, keep an eye out for those flying eyeless freaks. There's a good chance some of them will be coming after us." "Yes, sir," Lauren acknowledged enthusiastically. She gripped the steering controls, and with a slight lurch, they shot upwards. Angel engaged the enhanced sensors, and saw her screen light up with different structures, life signs, and energy signatures. It was overwhelming at first, but as she focused, she could make out groups of defenders and swallowed hard, seeing the sheer number of creatures assaulting them. Angel called the targets to Reynard, and his fingers flew across the console buttons before him. In a flurry of brightly colored bursts, enemies were turned to vapor, and civilians were spared with surgical precision. Beldaz, Lord of the Stone, bled profusely from his shoulder. but he refused to give the wound or his assailant the satisfaction of seeing him suffer. With a battle cry that echoed across the ruined town square, he cut through a trio of withered with his axe. All 3 heads were severed in one swing, and the putrid remains collapsed. He glanced around to see his defenders were holding strong, but the creatures weren't letting up. A glint in the sky caught his umber eyes, and he squinted to see an odd vessel above his city. He almost gave the order for his troops to fire upon it, but he held off. It didn't match any conclave vehicle he'd ever heard of. In his distraction, he didn't hear the shambling of another opponent until the wizard cracked him across the head with its crude wooden weapon. His helmet rang like a bell, and he staggered back as the world spun on its side. He loudly cursed his foolishness and struck out wildly with his axe, but it met only air as he fell onto his back. The next thing he heard was a crunch and gurgle before the wizard hit the ground next to him. Just as he was about to thank one of his soldiers for the assistance, a firm hand grabbed his own. "You're not going to let a simple wizard kill you, are you?" a familiar voice asked. Beldas shook his head vigorously and tapped the side of his helmet with the pommel of his weapon to try and force his vision to clear. He blinked several times until his eyes focused, and he gave a loud holler at the sight of an unexpected ally. "Defiler! What are you doing here? So sorry I said they couldn't come due to some nonsense with the treaty." His voice boomed over the sounds of battle. Despite Beldas being over a head taller than Lark, the young warrior had no problem pulling him up to his feet. "They're still figuring that out. In the meantime, I brought some friends." Lark motioned upwards to the ship. "We can go into who they are later, but they're going to give you cover fire for the civilians to get to safety, so we can focus on driving the army back." He whirled around and cut through a pair of withered that had approached as they spoke. Beldas picked up a shield from one of his fallen soldiers and tested the weight against his arm. "It still might not be enough. I've never seen this many of the bastards, and they still have giants coming from further away," he snarled. Lark frowned at the news. He knew the rot giants being left off the report had to have been an error, and a significant one at that. He gestured to the troops in the field of battle. "Where are your battle armor and tanks?" Beldas growled as he cleaved another corpse that approached him. "Sabotage. An electrical pulse ripped through all our hangars and short-circuited everything. Now, every suit of armor and tank is inoperative, and it has taken far too long to manage a proper defense." He turned and spat a mouthful of blood and a tooth that had been dislodged with the last blow to his head. "If I survive this, I'm going to find whoever is responsible and make them pay. I'll try to take care of the rot giants, and if we can't drive them back, we can at least give your families time to get away." Lark tapped his blade to the thick metal shield, a gesture among the stone skin of standing together as allies in battle. "Fight as one, my lord," he offered solemnly. "Die as one, my friend," Beldas finished, deeply moved by Lark's use of their sacred battle chant. Lark offered a final grim smile and ran towards the advancing army. Beldas sent a prayer to his ancestors, for his people and their allies, that they would all live to see the sunrise. Drossen, assault leader of the Ravagers, watched the battle from a hilltop far to the west. His eyes pierced the darkness to make out details of the vast army of creatures attacking the stone talons. "Assault leader!" A voice broke him from his analysis, and he gazed downward to see Calder, his best scout, kneeling with her arms crossed over her chest. "What did you find out, Scout?" His voice carried over the commotion of his pack and drew their attention to the conversation at hand. "Our suspicions have been confirmed. The Conclave has sent an overwhelming invading force against the Stone Talons. Their battle tech has been damaged somehow, and the Defiler has arrived to help them." "With an alien vessel I have never seen before," Calder answered. Her voice was even and clear to ensure no chance of miscommunication. "So Darkos is finally starting to make his move," Drossen mused, and examined the city once more. "They won't be able to drive them back without help." "That is my assessment as well," Assault Leader Calder concurred. "Then so be it." Drossen tipped his head back and roared so that all his contingent would hear. The sound was primal and seemed to shake the trees. Rolling his shoulders, rows of black armored plates with spikes formed over his spine. His limbs cracked and elongated as his knee joints reversed, and he fell to all fours. He raked his wicked, long claws across a flat stone, sending sparks flying to signal the others to follow suit. When all the nearly 50 Ravagers were transformed, they waited for Drossen's command. "We move at once. We strike our enemies without mercy and seize the opportunity for the glory of our people and our pack leader." His command carried across the rocks and into the forest. His pack howled and stomped in unison. Drossin looked to the city that lit up the night sky, thinking to himself that the centuries-long feud with the Stonekin would be put to the final test. Lark shouted triumphantly as he severed the rot giant's corpulent arm from its body. His blade sizzled with essence magic, and the stench of the cauterized wound was enough to nearly make him vomit. A second meaty fist flew at his head as the creature whirled around, but he managed to dodge and slice behind the bloated flesh from elbow to shoulder. The giant howled in rage and frustration. It shook its massive head and charged Lark directly. As he leaped to the side, a screech from above was the only warning he heard before needle-like claws slashed at his throat and landed glancing blows. Lark sidestepped the hunter, only to be slammed into the wall by the rot giant he had been evading in the first place. He channeled a wave of essence magic centered on himself, and the monsters were thrown back. As Lark brandished his weapon, the rot giant was already lurching towards him again, with a second in tow, and the blood hunter had taken flight. A group of 4 withered turned out of an alley and began to approach him as well. With the wall at his back, he was rapidly about to be surrounded. He grit his teeth in determination, and thought he had to survive. He closed his eyes, and time felt as though it stood still as he recalled his mother teaching him about essence magic. This power gives us a chance to do wonderful things, but the greater your power, the greater your responsibility. You must be willing to fight for others, or your power will mean nothing, she had said just weeks before she died. Unleash your anger upon your enemy, the voice of his father bellowed from the depths of his memories. Let your rage consume them, but never let it consume you. Suddenly, the memory of Angel's voice rang across his mind, as though she were standing beside him. Your determination and passion for your cause must power your magic. Lark opened his eyes and focused back on the battle before him. He bent down and picked up the blade of a fallen defender in his other hand. Dual-wielding was generally frowned upon as an Archblade training technique, citing that it surrendered defense for an entirely offensive fighting style. However, his father had trained him anyway, teaching him that if you never gave the enemy a chance to fight back, defense wasn't necessary. The blade in each hand began to glow bright white as he stared down his foes and charged them with a renewed sense of purpose. Reynard, a small family is cornered by the southeastern portion of the wall, Angel called out rapidly, sending the coordinates to the weapons system. Reynard nodded once for affirmation and instantly fired multiple blasts, incinerating the creatures. The Stonekin appeared confused by the sudden aid, but made use of the opening and promptly escaped elsewhere. Good work, everyone. Do we have eyes on Lark? I haven't heard from him since this began. Ocarin stood beside Lauren, watching the view screen. No, sir. I've tried contacting him, but he just might be too busy to respond, Angel replied, her voice laced with concern. A ring came through the communication systems, and she practically leaped onto her console just in case it was Lark with a timely response, but was instead startled by someone else. The crew was taken aback by the face of a reptilian creature that was looming large on the view screen, but Ocarin quickly recovered and stated, "We're pretty busy right now. What do you need?" "This is Assault Leader Drossin of the Ravagers," he responded with a polite bow of his head. "We are here to assist the Stonekin and turn back the Conclave's forces. Are you coordinating the defense?" Ocarin's surprise was drowned out by necessity. The Stonekin are doing their best to hold off the advancing forces, and Lark is in the thick of things trying to take out the siege units. If you can help him and harry their back end, I think that will be enough to finish this. Drossin offered a single gesture of agreement before glancing over his shoulder and calling out, "Group 7 follows me to aid the Defiler. The rest will attack their back formations and send these abominations back to the abyss." With that, the communication ended. "I thought they were enemies," Reynard said, flabbergasted between shooting targets. "We'll worry about that later," Ocarin called. "We have multiple targets closing in on us." Angel refocused the sensors, and Reynard targeted the Bloodhunters, attempting to swarm them. Despite the large number of creatures, they were all shot down before any could touch the ship, leaving the bridge crew free to continue their mission. Lark stood panting, with his eyes fixed on his prey. This giant had proven to be more resilient than the others, and he had been unable to find an opening to deal a critical blow. His breath was ragged, his clothes were torn, and he was beginning to lose feeling in one of his legs, but he refused to relent, challenging the creature to approach. Just as he raised his blades to renew his assault, the giant jerked to one side and fell over from the large assailant, tearing into his spine with claws and teeth. Lark squinted his eyes through the fatigue and grinned when he recognized his ally. "Drossin!" he called out and raised one sword in salute. "Fight now, talk later," Drossin snapped. then growled at the giant as it turned to face him. The moment its back was to him, Lark leaped forward, cutting deep with both blades to sever the flesh and tendons in the giant's right leg. The creature's bulk swung far to the right as it staggered, supported by only one limb, giving Drawson the opportunity to attack. The Ravager launched up and latched onto the rot giant's thick neck and pulled it to the ground. As he pinned the monstrosity down, Lark swung down with both blades and severed its head from the body. Now, with no opponents pressing in, Lark took a second to survey the battle. The Stonekin defenders were holding off the horde of Withered, and the Ravagers were tearing through the opposite end of the field. Feeling a surge of energy at the turning tide of battle, he spied the closest rot giant he could find and charged toward it. The fresh taste of victory spurred him on. That brings us to the end of Chapter 12. Yeah, large-scale battles are definitely hard for authors to get right. It's difficult to find the balance of having the eagle-eye view to see what all is going on, but then also getting swooped down to the ground level and having the individual dramas play out with characters that you care about and have a real sense of tension there. It's really easy to sort of get lost in the sauce. That played out really well. You switched viewpoints a few times, and we were able to see Lark on the ground and saw the new characters come in and the surprise assistance from the longtime foes between the Stonekin and the Ravagers. So you had the right perspectives available to you, and then the crew on the Forerunner were able to sort of give that top-down view by actually being top-down, I suppose. So yeah, it turned out really well. So let's go ahead and carry on with Chapter 13 while we're sort of in a groove here. Stonekin ingenuity is only surpassed by their unity and love of festivities. Dawn rose, and the battle had already been won. Despite the harrowing night, everyone was working hard to undo the damage that was done. The Stonekin had set about repairing their home, preparing the dead for burial, and hunting down any enemy left within their walls. The Ravagers scoured the land surrounding the city and slaughtered any remaining Conclave stragglers, having vowed not to leave a single one standing. Angel stood with wide eyes and a pounding heart at the doors of Talon Keep, a structure that had been carved from the mountain itself. It rose as tall as the Forerunner and was 3 times as wide. 2 defenders inclined their heads in respect to one of their allies and opened the thick wooden doors for her. "Thank you," they said in unison. "The Lord of Stone will be pleased to see you." Torches lit the hallway that led her deeper inside. Waiting for her was a man with arms as thick as her head and a beard down to his belly. He motioned for her to follow him, and they walked in silence. She was taken to a space fit for any celebration, with rows of tables on each side and a path up the center leading to a throne. It was wrought of limestone, and the white surface stood in stark contrast to the carved red walls. Where the room around it was painstakingly crafted to look like columns that held up the ceiling, the throne was decidedly more primal, with its jagged edges and rough surface. The guide left without a word. Now alone, her anxiety was returning, and she absently tapped the case of her pad. The tall windows behind the throne were alight from the alien blue sun that climbed above the horizon. She had been ordered to greet Beldez on her own, a task she had all but pleaded to get out of, but Akron was insistent. After the battle, he had helped the Stonekin repair conduits that had been damaged, and between the physical and mental exertion, he declared he was not fit for a diplomatic mission. Bastion, Lily, and Maya were tending to the wounded with Lark. Reynard was left on the bridge to act as a second in command. At last, Angel saw Lauren had fallen asleep at her console. Tarn was an enigmatic man of few words and not suited for ambassador work, all of which left Angel as the only suitable option. Akron had tried to reassure her, though, remarking that she had learned much about the alien world and its people. Despite the encouragement, being the first of the crew to greet the equivalent of a king was still intimidating. A pair of women wearing red dresses made of thick wool entered the hall with large plates of meats and cheeses, accompanied by enormous mugs. Angel was confused that the mugs were empty, until she noticed that along the walls were casks the size of sheds, Her mouth fell open from shock at the sheer volume of alcohol that was imbibed by these people. One of the women took a flower-engraved mug to one of the closer casks and filled it with a dark, foamy beverage. Angel stammered a thank you as the mug was placed on the table by her. She rolled it over in her hands and marveled that her fingertips could not touch due to the cup's circumference. Her fascination with the drinkware was interrupted as the large doors slammed open and Beldaz entered the hall looking frenzied. He was heaving with exertion, and fresh bandages could be seen through the collar and arm of his tunic. His eyes swiveled around the room until they landed on Angel. "You!" he bellowed as he rushed her, and she let out a startled squeak as he enveloped her in a crushing bear hug. Her feet were half a meter off the ground, and she gasped like a fish out of water from his tight hold. He then put her down and gave her a pat on the back that nearly knocked her over. "You're one of Lark's friends who came to help us." His voice was deep and echoed through the hall. "You didn't even know who we were, and yet you came to help and fight those blighters alongside us." He took a seat at the long table in front of her and motioned for her to sit beside him. A servant girl handed him a mug engraved with geometric patterns, and he took a long drink. "Yes, sir," she stammered nervously as she sat down at his left. "We have a policy about responding to requests for aid. People of honor and courage. We have to work out some kind of reward after we celebrate and pay tribute to our dead," Beldaz declared solemnly. The massive wooden doors creaked and opened slowly again, drawing the Stonekin leader's attention. Drawson was on one side, with one hand on the door, as he spoke to another Ravager beside him. He pointed outside, and his companion gave a half bow before departing. Angel was struck by the drastic differences between their bestial and bipedal forms. One was primal, deadly, and violent in its destructive efficiency. The other moved with fluid grace on two legs, and could show emotion with facial expressions. It shrank the gap between the alien races. "Drawson!" Beldaz called out jovially. Drawson approached the duo, his slower and more deliberate movements contrasting with Beldaz, who stood up and swiftly closed the distance between them. The Lord of Stone clasped arms with the Ravager assault leader and asked in a serious tone, "What would your father say if he saw you coming to our aid?" Drawson grinned, a row of sharp white teeth on full display. "It doesn't matter. I refuse to stand aside and watch your people get slaughtered by the Conclave, Beldaz." The Stonekin stood astonished at his old adversary's words. His voice grew soft as he was overcome with humility. "I know we've had some friendly messages, lad, but I never thought I'd see your people bleeding for us." Drawson inclined his head slightly, his wicked black horns glinting in the sunlight. "I've spent a lot of time in the field, Beldaz, and in that time, I have seen your people wanting to be free and happy, same as mine." He delicately grasped the mug offered to him, careful not to scratch the woman or the metal cup with his claws. "I'm tired of fighting people that want the same as us, wishing just to carry on our lives and raise our children in peace." The Lord of Stone turned away from his guests, and Angel could swear she had seen his eyes glistening. He strode to his throne, climbed on top, and began to wrench a large horn from its place on the wall. He had to tug hard several times as it was affixed by the stone wall that was molded to its form. Eventually, the stone crumbled under his might, and he dislodged it. As he approached Drawson, Angel noticed that this was no ordinary horn. It was a thick, black crescent filled with a craggy surface, and long, winding trails carved from base to tip. On closer inspection, the trails were filled with what looked like platinum. Small rings were pierced through the sides in long lines, each holding a sparkling, precious gem. Drawson's eyes widened as Beldaz offered the horn to him. "That's Drawsonia's horn," Beldaz finished. "One of the biggest reasons we've been fighting all this time." Seeing the reptilian face filled with such awe was odd, but Angel found it strangely endearing. She smiled as she watched Drawson take the horn and run her clawed finger over its surface. "The horn of my ancestor. You swore that you'd rather die than give it up." Drawson's voice was barely above a whisper. "Aye, and that's true, but my life means nothing compared to those of my people. You and your kin helped save thousands of lives today, and this is all I can think of that could ever measure up to that," Beldaz insisted. After a long moment of contemplation, Drawson shook his head and carefully pushed the horn back to Beldaz. The Age Lord looked confused, unsure how to respond to the refusal. "No," Drawson declined. "My ancestor was a fool, and attacked your people because she thought you would be easy prey and that your lands were rightfully hers. You deserve to have the trophy of defeating an enemy that threatened your people, Drossin stated with finality, making it clear he would not be dissuaded. I don't know what to say. I have to do something to mark the occasion, Beldas pondered, disquieted. You're doing it right now, Angel practically shouted. She had remained a respectful distance due to the importance of their exchange, but now she approached. Both leaders turned to her, perplexed, and she almost quelled under her gaze. Quelled? Yeah. She felt her heart pounding, and a part of her criticized that she was overstepping her bounds. Louder than that, though, was Lark's voice, reminding her not to overanalyze the situation. You are enemies, and yet you are willing to put aside your pride and differences to fight together. You believe in each other. That is far more important than any gift or gesture you could make. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she held her head high. Drossin smiled at her, then glanced at Beldas. She's right. Bolstered by the approval, Angel's voice became more assertive, and her confidence rose with every word she spoke. Most importantly, this is the thing the Conclave fears the most: unity and common ground among races that might challenge them. Now that's something I can drink to, Beldas roared with amusement. As if summoned by magic, the servers quickly refilled each of the ornate mugs. Beldas grabbed his, followed by Drossin and Angel. They all clinked their cups together in a toast. Angel choked on the bitter drink as she took the first sip, but the other two seemed immune to the drink's effects. To her relief, the second sip wasn't as bad. But would your father agree to an alliance? If the Conclave came after us, they could easily come for your people as well. Beldas slammed his empty mug down, his voice simmering with anger at the prospect. I don't know. If the Defiler came back with me, we might be able to convince him of the gravity of the situation together. Drossin turned to Angel and gave a slight bow. With your people's help, of course. A neutral group that just arrived on Durance could go a long way to convincing my pack leader of the severity of the Conclave's actions. Angel returned the gesture. I'll have to get my captain's approval, but after today, I think we'd be happy to help. The conversation became more relaxed, and the pair spoke of more personal things. Drossin spoke about recently discovering he would have a new baby sibling, and Beldas gushed about the joys of being a grandfather. Angel didn't have much to contribute, but she nonetheless felt their happiness and camaraderie. Lauren stood before a colossal fountain of a heavily armored man. The imposing figure wielded a giant hammer that he slung over one shoulder. He held a crescent horn that bubbled in his other hand, and the water poured forth to fill the basin that he stood in. Dravik sat on the pond's edge, and Lauren watched bemused as the old officer told stories to a captivated group of more than a dozen children. The Forerunner crew had been instructed to meet with Beldas to discuss the acquisition of an energy prism and learn more about the Stonekin people. The Stonekin city was vast as it stretched around and into the mountains. Rows of large buildings ringed the city in neat lines, with space for roads between them. Many of them had puffs of smoke or steam wafting from narrow chimneys. The shapes of the houses were simple cubes or rectangles, and they were made of a rock composite material that repelled impacts, as evidenced by the minimal damage from the Conclave attack. Rising above the city were the stone talons themselves. Massive red rock spires curved slightly at the top to appear like a bloody talon reaching up from the ground. Lauren didn't get to fully appreciate them on board the Forerunner in the pre-dawn hours, but now, in the midday sun, she was in awe of how small they made her feel as she stood at their base. The rock face was covered in columns of dwellings of various sizes. Staircases and steam-powered elevators would bring the citizens from the top of the mountains to the city below. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of Angel and turned to see her crewmate waving as she approached with the Stonekin Lord. Dravik hastily finished his story and laughed as he watched the children scatter to play amongst themselves. He moved to stand beside Lauren in time for the pair to arrive. Is the captain resting? Angel asked after introductions were made. Yes, right after repairs were done. He told me to take his place so he wouldn't embarrass himself in front of our new friends by passing out. Lauren pointed towards the Forerunner, packed in the immense town square. Stonekin surrounded the ship and inspected the alien vessel with fascination. You're relieved if you want to get some sleep yourself, Angel. Angel thought for a long minute, then clasped her hands behind her back. I'm fine for now. I would prefer to be here to learn about our new friends firsthand. The crew focused on Beldez, and Lauren asked, "So, where do we start?" Beldez opened his arms as he turned to the fountain. "We start here. This is the center of our city, and where our people gather to talk about their day and business. 'Tis a likeness of my ancestor, Tardaeus, the first Lord of the Stone, and our city's founder." Dravik ran his hand over the lip of the fountain. "The craftsmanship is solid. How old is it?" "As old as we are," Beldez exclaimed with pride. "It has been rebuilt many times, but it always stands here. It was heavily damaged in the attack last night, but our stone shapers had it back up just after breakfast." Dravik examined the magic-carved surfaces of the statue. It was perfectly smooth and was done with almost surgical precision. He would be hard-pressed to find a regular artisan with that skill level outside of a master's. "Stone shapers are their earth mages," Angel explained, cutting through his thoughts. "Their magic is similar to what Lark and the Sosarians use, but they lack the ability to use other elements. However, their specialization in earth magic gives them exceptional proficiency and lets them do amazing things with stone and ground formations." "They create our homes," Beldez continued with his hand, and his eyes led all the way up one of the imposing talons. "They carve out plumbing and irrigation systems to bring water to our people and crops, and they open caves for our families to hide in during the attack to keep them safe." "That explains where they went during the battle," Dravik observed. "Aye, our mages aren't trained for combat, but I still wouldn't try challenging one to a fight if I were you. They could open the ground beneath your feet before you could blink," Beldez bragged with a hearty laugh. "What about your tanks and armor?" Lauren inquired. "We were told they were your greatest weapons." The Lord of Stone frowned and waved for them to follow him. He led them several roads away to a large building made of metal and stone. The roof was steepled, and steam vapor rose from a large set of chimneys. A pair of guards greeted them with a salute and opened the doors for the group to enter. Angel and Lauren's simultaneous gasps and the following whistle of approval from Dravik were drowned out by the cacophonous sounds of the Stonekin talking and even singing as they worked on repairing their creations. 6 large tanks were parked side by side in the center of the structure as Stonekin crawled over them with small tools for inspections and adjustments. Each tank was 12 meters wide and 10 deep. Wide metal treads on each side were perfect for climbing almost sheer rocky surfaces. Glowing red crystals were grafted into the back, and snaking tubules fed the runoff energy into the single large barrel designed to fire magical bursts to devastate its target. The walls of the structure were lined with suits of armor, each inset into its own alcove. Each was as tall as Bastion, made of a crimson metal alloy and polished to a mirror shine. "How do they work? Are they powered by magic?" Angel asked, as she approached one of the large suits of armor. Her face clearly reflected on the red surface that reminded her of Lark's eyes. "Ignition gems," Beldez explained, as he walked past her with Lauren and Dravik close behind. He quickly caught a crystal the size and color of a hot coal tossed by one of the engineers. He opened a small chamber on the spine of the nearest set of armor before snapping the gem into place. The armor whirred to life, letting out bursts of steam from the joints, and lights blinked to life all along the arms and legs. "Crystals from our mountains that hold geothermal energy," he continued. "Charge them in lava or extreme heat, and they can power a suit of armor for most of a day." Dravik leaned down to examine the armor closely. Lightweight metal alloy, cushioned interior, impact distribution, pneumatic joints. Not even know what everything else does. He stood and ran a finger over the collar of metal plates that encircled each side. "No helmet, though." Beldez shook his head. "Not without mucking up the pilot's vision. Been working on that one for a while, but no functional solutions yet." A Stonekin woman in full armor approached from outside, holding a large rectangular wooden box across her arms. "Lord of Stone! I have the gifts ready for our guests." She carefully set the box down with a soft thud and knelt beside it. "Well done." He clapped the woman on the pauldron, and she rose to face the guests fully. "This is Rillan, of the First Defenders. She will be transporting the prisms you requested to your ship." "Prisms?" Lauren exclaimed, as the 3 Forerunner crew members gaped at each other in shock. "We thought you would have maybe a single spare for us." "No, miss," Rillan corrected firmly. "We had 4 that matched your specifications and carefully sculpted them into the shape you showed us." "That's a haul," Dravik crowed. A single one of these is hard enough to get. 4 would be worth a fortune back home. He peered at Rillen skeptically. Are you sure they're correct? If they're the right chemical composition, they would weigh a ton. I'm stronger than I look, the Stonekin woman boasted with a confident grin. She patted her shoulder and pointed to the gem in her back. Armor helps, too. I can lift 5 times my normal weight and swing a weapon with the force of a landslide. Very impressive, Lauren complimented softly as she watched Rillen move to pick up the box. Dravik, help our powerful friend find her way to the ship, and then offer her something to eat as thanks. I'll be there later to share a drink if she has the time. So long as it's quality stuff, Rillen chuckled as she held the box over her shoulder, as though showing off. I only drink water and alcohol older than I am. Dravik led the armored woman back outside towards the ship. Angel held up an ignition gem, examining it between her fingers. Would you mind if I borrowed one of these to study it? She asked. If they harness heat energy as you described, they could be useful for my research. You can keep it, Beldes offered easily. I would give you some armor to go with it, but we need every suit we have for the next time Darkos comes for us. The crystal is more than enough, thank you, Angel gushed, as she inspected the gem in the sunlight. Loud hollering and sounds of thundering footfalls against the ground outside the hangar drew their attention. The group, and some of the mechanics, went to the entrance and were greeted with the sight of Ravagers bounding past the hangar in their bestial forms, with nearly every Stonekin man, woman, and child stopping to cheer them on. Is there something wrong? They were in quite a hurry. Angel craned her head to watch the last one go by, and the cloud of dust following in the wake. That they are. We promised them a feast to thank them for their help in the fight and clearing up the battlefield. Now they're headed to the great hearth to enjoy the fruits of their labors. Beldes gestured for the women to walk, and fell in step beside them. Come along. I want to be there while they celebrate, and I could use a meal myself. The 3 jogged after the Ravagers, with what appeared to be the entire city in tow. The great hearth was a massive armored outdoor structure with no walls or doors, and endless rows of dining tables on each side. The center was nearly 24 roasting spits, smokers, grills, and tables to season and prepare food. At the back were 6 columns of casks and endless shelves of mugs. The heart of our home, Beldes informed, as he navigated the rowdy crowd and retrieved 3 plates covered in cooked meat, herb-crusted bread, and chilled fruit. Angel and Lauren sat, and he set the plates down in front of them before taking his seat. Lauren immediately dug in and moaned at the delicious flavors. Where do you normally sit? Angel inquired, as she searched around the ample space. There was no dais, throne, or table that was proper for a ruler to sit at. I eat with my people, he replied, as though it were obvious. We rarely eat separately. Families will sometimes have private meals for special occasions, or an improvised feast to mark a gathering as we did after the battle. Each day our people eat together and put aside rank to tell tales and enjoy each other's company. The Ravagers seem to enjoy it, Angel observed, as she eyed the large, scaled fighters, inundated with an endless sea of food being brought to them, along with the heartfelt praise and gratitude of everyone around them. Drossin sat at the end of the table and listened patiently as a pair of young twins talked excitedly about something. There was a pause, and with a nod, Drossin extended his hand, palm up. The first twin, hesitantly, reached out to touch his fingers, followed by her sibling. Suddenly, they burst into wild giggles and darted back into the crowd to find their parents. Drossin laughed heartily and took the full mug that was given to him. Angel was still full from earlier, but she politely nibbled on the food in front of her and found herself watching the crowd more than anything. Hundreds of people were gathered to dine together, and the air was filled with the sounds of celebration and singing as they shared the joy of being alive. Lauren, however, by all accounts, was starving by how she devoured her meal. When she finished her spiced mead, she slammed the mug down as she had seen countless other diners do, and turned to the Lord of Stone. Your people are fine hosts, Beldes, she offered sincerely. I wish we could do more for you. Hi, Angel told me about your laws, Beldes replied solemnly. I respect your need to stay out of the conflict, and appreciate it that much more that you stepped in to help my people. He stared into his drink before finishing it in a single swig. But if you change your mind about fighting the Conclave, I want to be the first one to know. Drossin and I are already discussing an alliance, and we would be honored for your people to be a part of that. Lauren's brows pinched together, and she was concerned that she may have offended him. She warred with herself on whether she should voice her opinion on how much they could help with such an alliance, but her training and loyalty to their laws kept her impulses in check. Her internal struggle was interrupted when Maya approached the table. She breathed a sigh of relief before she turned towards the doctor and offered her a large piece of meat. Maya held up her hand in a polite refusal. "They kept me well fed while I helped the wounded," she reassured warily before turning to Angel. "I was heading to the Forerunner when I saw you and thought you would like to know that Lark was carried back to the ship a short while ago." "Carried? Is he all right?" Angel stood suddenly as panic rose in her voice. "He's fine. After spending the night fighting, he spent the day helping me tend to the wounded. He refused to rest when I told him to, and he overexerted himself," the older woman chuckled. "That does sound like him," Angel mused with a small grin. Just as she was about to sit, she glanced at her tailmates and decided otherwise. "Actually, I'll go with you. Thank you again, my lord, for everything today. The things I've learned have been invaluable." She bowed deeply before departing with Maya and leaving Lauren to enjoy the food and conversation with Beldaz. Angel sat reading her pad beside Lark's sleeping form on the bed. It had been hours since she returned to the Forerunner, and he had barely stirred. She had already finished her reports, and now worked on observational data for the ignition gem while occasionally examining him to see if he had any problems resting. He shifted briefly, and she rested her hand on his chest as she thought about how grateful she was that he was okay. There had been many injuries, but few deaths, thanks to the efforts of the Forerunner crew, the Stonekin defenders, and the Ravagers, and Lark. Drossen's group had left just shortly after they had enjoyed the day-long celebration of feasts and gratitude from the Stonekin people. She looked up to see the door open as Akron entered. He shot a quick glance at Lark and asked quietly, "Still resting?" She nodded. Maya said his wounds are mostly healed, and he managed to eat something before he lost consciousness. I just came to check on him. Akron gave her a knowing look before moving a chair beside her and sat at eye level. "I went over your report on the meeting with Beldaz, as well as your proposal to help the Ravagers. It was very well done." Angel held her breath while waiting for any contradictions, but they never came. "You've proven to be a damned good observer. At this point, you know more directly about the people we've encountered than any of us. So, I want you to handle diplomatic relations and be our resident expert on this world from now on," Akron declared, but his voice remained soft. She opened her mouth to refuse, but after what she had seen that day, she paused. She had been a witness to history being made, and she had an effect on the outcome. She wanted to help more, and not just by hiding behind a pad or a console. Her thoughts left her speechless, and when she realized Akron was still waiting for an answer, she gave a nod to indicate her acceptance. He leaned back and smoothed out his uniform. "Then, as our resident expert, I want your opinion on something. Forget about being polite, or having to speak to me as your captain. I want your blatant honesty." It was a strange request, one he had never voiced before. Her curiosity was burning, but she could say anything. But before she could say anything, he continued. "Do you think we are crossing the line with what we are doing here?" he asked cautiously. Angel took time to think about her answer, glancing once more at Lark as he slept before she finally focused back on the captain. "Yes, we are. Our laws are extremely clear about involving ourselves in conflicts and politics of other worlds. We've been involved since Adura attacked us. That involvement has only worsened with going to Sosaria, helping the Stonekin, and possibly helping Drossen and the Ravagers." Akron sighed heavily. "So you think we need to stop?" She shook her head vigorously and turned directly to face him. "I didn't say that, Captain. Our laws were built on the foundation that anyone can be reasoned with. That leaving well enough alone would be better in the long run for others and our people." She stopped momentarily to take a breath, and when he didn't interrupt her, she resumed. "However, the Conclave is the most destructive, horrific thing we have ever faced. Far more so than the children of Alpha. If they aren't stopped here, they will spread to other worlds, and quite possibly to our own. How can we claim to be acting in everyone's best interests if we stand on the sidelines and let such evil thrive?" But we don't know if they will win. For all we know, they would have lost already, but our involvement could be a catalyst that triggers their developing some terrible weapon or an unstoppable creature, Akron retorted. He knew he was speaking as a captain should, but his words felt hollow. Angel didn't argue further, and instead turned back to Lark, and she pushed a lock of his black hair back from his eyes. A thought occurred to her, and she smiled, without facing back to the captain. How is the development of the cure for the treekin going? Are you going to let the doctor use it if it's successful? Akron didn't bother giving a response. He knew very well the point she was making, and he suspected that she knew the truth. He stood from his seat and walked back to the door, turning back to her. His tone became official again. We are headed for the Ravager's colony. After that, most likely to the Star Canopies. If nothing else, we should visit the other provinces and see what else we can learn. He wished he could have definitively said what their final plans were, but without anything more to say, he left in silence. Lark sat up and wildly searched around, unsure and lost to his surroundings. The soft blue light of the console in his room helped pierce his confusion as his memory came into focus. He then put together the events that brought him to his quarters. He shifted his weight and felt something warm and soft press against him. He gazed down and smiled when he saw Angel's sleeping form beside him. He laid back down and placed a gentle kiss on the back of her neck. Angel groaned and rolled over to face him. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him with relief as her vision adjusted. Glad to see you're awake. Have you been here with me this whole time? Lark's voice dropped low, and he ran a slow hand along her side. Almost. I didn't mean to fall asleep, though. She sat up and stretched her arms over her head. A soft moan escaped her lips, and Lark's hand shot out to take hers, and he pulled her against him. His heart thundered in his chest, and he dipped his head down for a lingering kiss. She had stilled in his arms when he broke away, and murmured, You don't have to go, you know. Her breath caught in her throat, and she blushed deeply as his meeting dawned on her. Unable to find the words her heart and body wanted her to say, she hoped that actions would speak for her. She pressed her trembling lips against his, and his reaction was almost instantaneous. He growled into the kiss and tangled his hand in her lengthy hair. His lips were eager as they broke in contact and began to trail downward. She was happy to see that he could read her desires as well as she could read his. Lark traced the curves of Angel's naked body above the sheet. There was barely any distance between them in his bed, and even in the dim light, they could see every feature of each other. You're awfully quiet. Angel's voice was just above a whisper. Her eyes were fixed to his, which appeared almost black in the darkness. Her heart raced, not only because of their recent intimacy, but because he hadn't said anything since. Her anxiety was rising, but he spoke just as it was beginning to overtake her. I was just thinking, he began, and grasped her hand before bringing it up to his lips, where he kissed her knuckles reverently, that meeting you and your people has completely changed my life. He leaned forward to kiss her gently and pressed his body against hers. For the better? She inquired, hope laced in each word as she placed her hand on his cheek. Lark let out a slight hum of agreement and pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. I think so. I was content with spending my life going on missions to fight the Conclave, to aid and help the other people of my world. Most likely being a soldier my entire life, he trailed off. And now? She nuzzled his throat, and his fingers raised to stroke through her hair. Now? I'm not sure, and that scares me a little. I've never felt so much uncertainty about my life, and I'm unsure of the direction I should take. His voice almost shook as he nuzzled her. Angel gave him a reassuring squeeze, touched by the vulnerability of his words. I feel the same way, she offered, and he held her tighter. My life was just research, science, exploration, and doing my job. However, now that I've met you and we're thrown into this conflict, I have to admit that I'm scared because I don't know what will happen next. He chuckled. The sound rumbled through his chest, and she found comfort in it. Well, we both admitted that we're scared. What's next? Angel burrowed into his arms with a contented sigh. We try to figure things out. Together. Lark raised her chin and gazed into her eyes, moved by the simple wisdom of her words. He captured her lips in a passionate kiss and held her tightly. She sighed contentedly and responded in kind. When he broke away, his fingers resumed their lazy path along her hips and waist. Your uniform does an amazing job of hiding your figure, he observed. Despite her nudity, Angel reflexively gathered the sheet around her chest and buried her face into his neck, embarrassed. I've always been shy about my body, so I try to hide it for the most part. He laughed softly and kissed down her throat, giving her collarbone a tiny lick to elicit a shiver from his lover. I am honored that I get to see you as you really are. Angel ran her fingers through his hair. I bet you say that to all the girls, she had teased. Lark licked the other side. Hardly, since you're the first I've been with. He alternated licks and kisses on her growing, sensitive skin, until realization dawned on her, and she pulled away in confusion. Wait, you mean you've never been intimate with someone before? She stammered. No, is that odd for your culture? He asked, tilting his head curiously. Well, yes. I mean, no! I'm sorry. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It just really surprises me. She fumbled over her words as they sped up from her nervousness. Why? His voice was even, without a hint of discomfort with the subject. Because you're so handsome, she blurted out, looking down bashfully. And then, you were so passionate earlier. I had no idea it was your first time. She drew close to him, so that they lay face to face. Why have you waited this long? Lark shrugged, his hand once more caressing her curves. All my free time was gone to training and fighting. I had almost nothing of a social life. He focused on the wall behind Angel for a second and winced a little at the embarrassing memories going through his mind. I had some very awkward conversations and outings with a girl here and there, but there was always something missing. And now? He gently took her hand and placed it upon his chest. And now my heart is running laps, and I can't stop thinking about this beautiful woman from another world who has made me feel things I never knew I could, he confessed. She tilted forward and placed a feather-like kiss between her fingers, and she could almost feel his heart pounding beneath them. As she returned her attention to his face, she saw that he watched her intently and drew him down for a deep kiss. Once again, finding words failing her, she allowed her actions to tell him how she felt. And that brings us to the end of chapter 13. Yeah, so some of the inflections, since I don't read ahead, I kind of have to play it by ear. So if it doesn't come out exactly as you intended, I'm sorry. There's only so much I can do while trying not to spoil myself. But, okay, if that's as steamy as it gets, I think we're okay. There's implication, but nothing explicit, and that is just about right. That's the level you want to reach for, right? Let me look back through. That was a longer chapter. See what we're talking about. Yeah. So the post victory scenes are a lot of fun. You get that's a classic of any genre. You get the Ewok party on Endor. You get all the Helm's Deep celebration after victory. You get all sorts of things like that. That's a universal constant. People come together, and after almost certainly being overwhelmed, and then they come out on top, and you just like gotta cut loose, release some steam, that sort of thing. And it played out well. Yeah, I definitely understand that could be. It's a potentially sensitive topic, and even reading it aloud, even having that conversation, can be awkward. So having it with just your internal voice as you're writing it, or even just reading it to yourself, can play out very differently from hearing it. You experience as I'm finding as we're going through this, you experience books differently when they're read aloud. But yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I grew up with those too. A lot of fun there. So I definitely get some of those vibes. You get a little bit of like get just enough campy that you just like it clicks with you. It's fun. It's not like super duper serious. I will say, Angel getting the Kirk moment was unexpected as when we were getting into things at the very start, but it works. So, all right, it is a little after 9, and I'm running a little dry. So, I'm going to step aside for just a minute, grab another drink from the fridge, check up on the cats, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Feel free to keep chatting amongst yourselves, and I'll be back, and we'll get through a couple more chapters tonight. update this real quick. We've got a bit of a shift to get through the rest of the night. I do have to work in the morning, so gotta pretend to be responsible here. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump back into it. We went a little bit long in the first half, so we'll probably only be able to get through another 1 or 2 chapters tonight, judging from the length of this next one, with the time that we've got left. If we have to run a little over, so be it. I'm not going to complain too much. So, let's just jump right back in with chapter 14. Dravik stood at the central console attached to the Nova Drive and ran through the meticulous routine he used at the beginning of and end of each day. He had just relieved Tarn of his shift, so he could possibly get some rest, though Dravik suspected he'd just go to the kitchen and start preparing food for the next day. A new display at the base of the screen of Dravik's console kept beckoning his attention. Right now, it was simply a progress bar that slowly blinked. But according to Angel, it would eventually be the readout for the Earth enhancement. The theory made sense to him, but the practical application was mind-boggling. However, after Angel's success with the sensors, he was eager to see how this upgrade would work. "You're up early," Lark's voice called behind him. "Old habit from being in the army," Dravik reported without taking his eyes off the display. "What are you doing here?" Angel needed more sleep. "She wanted me to check on the progress of the Earth frequency implementation," Lark stated as he stood beside him, studying the display as well. 6% and climbing steadily, Dravik reported, standing straight and rubbing his lower back where the muscles ached. "It should be finished in a few days, if we can start testing it then." He turned his gaze to Lark, examining him much in the same way he had the console. "What is this supposed to do, exactly?" "It's hard to say until we get it fully online, but my best estimate is that it will harden your outer hull as though enchanted with earth magic. You are, theoretically, making it tougher to penetrate and damage. So, between the enhancements from Sosaria making your ship resistant to Conclave magic, and this frequency upgrade, your ship will be extremely durable," Lark explained, studying the other displays, showing the status of the ship and the engine. "Sounds impossible to me, but then again, everything from your world has sounded impossible as well," Dravik chuckled. "Angel told me you'd found the frequency for the fire magic thanks to the Stonekin ignition gem." "That's right. It will take some time to find the others, but now that we have the process down, I'm sure we'll find them soon." Lark leaned down and tapped the screen, as if it would make the upgrade happen faster. "Stop that," Dravik barked, causing Lark to stand at attention and look at him apologetically. "Pet peeve of mine. Angel can tell you all about how I harassed her during our first days here," he explained with a smirk, walking to the center of the room that housed the prism drive chamber. "You two are getting close," he remarked, once more looking over the display attached to the Nova Drive. Lark was almost out the door when he froze at the implication. Dravik's tone made him think of his childhood, when he was being told something deathly serious by his father. He swallowed hard and turned around. With his best attempt at a candid smile, "I suppose we are." "I'm happy to hear that. She should be close to someone. She's a brilliant girl, and she isolates herself more than what is good for her," Dravik voiced, prompting a breath of relief from the younger man. "I completely agree. I'll admit I was worried when you were going to that you were going to threaten my life or something like that," Lark chuckled nervously. The seconds ticked by between them. Finally, Dravik responded, "She's an adult, and she can handle herself just fine. But if anything goes wrong, we might have to have a few words, you and I." When it was clear Dravik had nothing left to discuss, Lark left the drive room with a sudden sense of urgency, and wondered how serious the senior engineer was. All the while, Dravik cackled to himself at Lark's expense. Quick aside, if any of us have children or sisters, you can empathize with Dravik. If you've ever been in that position on the other side, you can empathize with Lark. That was a fun exchange. "Do you really think this will have any effect?" Reynard asked skeptically. He had barely slept for 4 hours, and now he found his tactical console had been hijacked while he was absent. Lark glanced over to Angel, who busily entered commands and read the results on the tactical console. "We won't know until we try," she answered, thanks to the ignition gem. "We found the fire frequency pretty quickly, and this morning, Lark and I found air." Reynard shrugged, but couldn't tear himself away from watching Angel work. It's still hard to believe that simple frequencies can provide such significant changes. "It's more complicated than that," she retorted, without breaking her attention from the console. "We've only begun to explore what the prisms are capable of when exposed to these kinds of intense energies. When we discovered the ability for faster-than-light travel, all scientific research was focused on that, and further energy research was put on hold." She stood straight to stretch and rolled her shoulders. "I just theorized how to expand that research into a wider spectrum." "And supposedly they work with magic?" Reynard's skepticism crept back into his voice. "That was his idea," she beamed as she touched Lark's arm. "He saw similarities between their magic and the energy frequency I was researching. Then, after a lot of time collaborating, we discovered a way for him to identify elemental characteristics on our frequency bands to enhance our systems." Reynard hummed in acknowledgement and kept further comments to himself. He was still unsure about the concept, but trusted them to know what they were doing. "We're done here for now." Angel disconnected her pad and pulled away to make room for Reynard to take his station. "Now that we have 3 frequencies, I'll review all the data to determine where we can find water." She nearly trembled from excitement at the prospect of her theories finally coming to fruition. Just as they turned to leave, Lauren called out to Lark from the pilot's seat. "We're approaching the rocky lowlands right before the Ravager colony you mentioned. You warned us about how we should be careful here?" He walked towards the view screen and narrowed his eyes as if searching for something. "There's a powerful creature here that tries to eat anything entering its home. If we were on the ground, I would say we should give the place a wide berth. However, so long as we stay high enough in the air, it won't be able to get to us." "What kind of creature?" Reynard asked. His curiosity spiked with fervor. "Drossen's people call it the Great Devourer. The Stonekin call it that big damned worm." He chuckled. "It's the size of a small mountain. There's no way of knowing how long it actually is. It's covered with thick armor plating and eats anything that moves. No one has ever been able to wound it, so we just leave it alone." "Sounds like we could do the planet a favor by eliminating it," Lauren declared mischievously. Lark snorted and extended a hand towards the screen. "You're welcome to try. Killing it would benefit everyone, but even with your firepower, I doubt you can harm it." At that challenge, the bridge was flooded with near tangible enthusiasm. The rapid chirping and clicking from Angel and Reynard's consoles indicated they were performing scans in preparation for an attack. A low hum reverberated through the ship as Lauren entered a command, causing it to hold a position in the air. She then opened a transmission to Akron's quarters. "Sir, requesting permission to blow up a big damned worm," Lauren asked in a very official tone. The transmission went silent for a second before Maya could be heard uncontrollably giggling in the background, and Akron responded incredulously. "Are you serious?" "Yes, sir. It's a native hostile creature that has nothing to do with the conflict with the Conclave. Evidently, it's been a huge problem for them, and Lark doesn't think we can hurt it." Lauren's eyes flashed with excitement. "Are we sure it isn't a vital part of the ecosystem?" Maya interjected, finally calm enough to speak. "Certain of it," Lark affirmed. "The Stonekin said this area was a thriving grassland centuries ago before that thing showed up." He glared at the view screen and the lifeless stretch of land. "If it weren't for the surrounding mountains keeping it trapped here, who knows what destruction it would cause." Akron contemplated for a while before finally assenting. "All right. We have some time to spare before we meet Drossen at the colony anyway." His voice took on a serious edge as he ordered, "Just be careful." "Found it," Angel reported as she watched the sensor readings. "Enormous life sign, 300 meters below the surface on the port side of the valley." The view screen homed in on the location and magnified to show the exact spot the readings had indicated. "How are you going to get to it? It only comes out when it feeds, when it feels vibrations on the surface to come out to feed," Lark asked skeptically. Reynard's hands flew across the tactical console until he stopped and intently watched the screen. "There's a point where we can fire there." He pointed to a large outcropping of stone that overlooked where the worm lay dormant underground. It should cause a rock slide and make enough racket to get its attention. Lauren gestured for him to proceed, and Reynard entered the command to fire. Dual blasts of bright energy flew and hit the rock formation. It shuddered, then began to collapse. Dust and rocks erupted from the cracks, and a high-pitched grinding sound could be heard even through the hull of the Forerunner. Boulders, the size of small buildings, tumbled downward and struck the ground like a titanic rainstorm. The following silence was nearly palpable as the crew held their collective breaths to see if there would be a response. As time stretched on, there was an unspoken question of how effective the rock slide was. Just as Lauren was about to give a second command to fire, a deep rumbling sound was heard from all directions. The ground cracked open with a sound like thunder, and a roar came from the darkness that sent vibrations through each person on the bridge. A mouth, large enough to swallow the ship, rushed out into the light. It had no eyes, only a hole lined with rows and rows of needle-like black teeth set in pulsing red flesh. The body was composed of overlapping plates of dark brown carapace and small bladed appendages sticking out along each side. Each crew member drew back reflexively as the monstrosity almost reached their height before it crashed back to the ground. It bellowed once more and barreled towards the debris with an abnormal speed for a creature its size. "Are you sure this thing is natural?" Angel practically screamed in shock. "It looks more like another monster from the Conclave," Lauren concurred as she steered the ship higher above the creature. Lark braced himself against Angel's console with a hand on her back and shook his head. "It has no signs of entropy magic, and essence magic does nothing to it. So we're sure it's not one of their creations." "Its armor is weakest along its bottom side," Angel reported. "Everything else is too thick to penetrate." "What about the mouth?" Lauren called out. The worm picked up one of the largest boulders with its teeth, and they watched in amazement as it shattered the stone as though it were delicate glass. "As tempting a target as that is, I don't think hanging around that area for the perfect shot is the best strategy," Reynard refuted. "So we get it on his back," Lauren smirked. Reynard grinned and entered another command to fire. The creature screeched in rage as blasts of energy pelted its back. Only blackened pockmarks remained, but it had the intended effect. The worm whipped around to face the ship and raised like a snake, ready to strike. "Almost," Lauren cautioned. Reynard kept up the assault of precision strikes along its abdomen, and the worm let out a gurgle before it shot upwards to lunge at the ship. "Now!" Lauren cried out. Reynard turned up the power, and Lark watched in awe as the Forerunner's weapons tore into the impossibly large creature. As though collapsing along a weakened line, the more potent blasts opened the belly of the worm like a zipper being pulled, and viscera and organs spilled onto the ground, and the worm faltered. It roared again, weaker this time, and foamy blood sprayed from its mouth, splattering on the hull. With a final blast, Reynard severed the last of the beast in half, and it hung suspended for a moment before it slammed its twitching bulk onto the ground. A geyser of dust and debris washed over the ship, but when it cleared, the worm was clearly dead. "Incredible," Lark said breathlessly as he approached the view screen to examine the legendary monster's corpse. "All this time, I thought it was indestructible." "Our weapons are designed to pierce heavy ship plating," Reynard explained with a smug look. "It's just a matter of finding the right spot." "There's some kind of structure down there," Angel interrupted, pointing at the large hole the creature had created. "What?" Lark exclaimed as his attention turned to her findings. "Subterranean, about 30 cubic meters. Strange metallic composition." Angel's voice trailed off as she studied the readings. "Conclave." Lark narrowed his eyes and stared at the view screen. "They use a unique alloy for their buildings to make them stronger and resistant to magic." A long stretch of silence passed as Lark studied the data alongside Angel. The other crew members exchanged anxious looks and wondered what would be done next. Finally, Lark's voice broke the silence. "I need to speak with the captain." The view screen blipped white, then black, before Akron and Maya's faces illuminated the screen. "Any problems with the worm?" Akron asked, his brow furrowed. "We heard a lot of racket even in here." "No. I underestimated the firepower your ship is capable of," Lark replied. "However, we have a new problem. Down where the creature made its home, there is an old Conclave facility. I need to go and investigate it." Akron rubbed his chin, contemplating the new information. He leaned over to speak to Maya, but the words were too quiet to be heard through the transmission. After the brief discussion, he returned with a grim look and inquired, "What kind of risks will you be taking? Is there anyone down there?"
It appears abandoned, Angel reported from her console. No life signs. No trace of biological material at all. Based on the corrosion, it's hundreds of years old. Lark looked at her gratefully before returning his gaze to Akron. It should be safe. But we never ignore anything they leave behind. There could be important technology or information there. Very well, Akron agreed. Lark went to leave when Akron continued, forcing him to halt immediately. But you aren't going alone. Lauren and Bastion will go with you. I'll be there in a minute to take over, and then you can head out. Everyone knew to hold their positions, and so they waited. Lark pulled her close to his side. She sighed contentedly, looking up at him. What do you think you'll find down there? She asked. I have no idea, Lark answered, sounding uneasy. But I've never seen a facility this old before. Usually they are destroyed or harvested by the Conclave for resources. So if this one was left intact, that means they left in a hurry. Even if your scans don't pick anything up, we should stay alert. He squeezed her subtly, and she leaned her head against his chest, a silent agreement between them that he would be careful. Are we sure this place is stable? Bastion called out nervously as he tried to stifle a cough from the thick dust in the air. The Forerunner had dropped them off at the pit's edge, and Lark's earth magic shaped a safe descent down to the structure's entrance. It should be. This has a familiar composition to bedrock, and from the scans, the building is fully intact, Lauren answered, while pressing hard against the frame to emphasize her point. She flipped on her datapad's light feature and held it out to illuminate the area around the entrance. Lark moved to the front, sword in hand, and held up a hand for them to stay behind him as he cautiously walked into the structure. Once his sight adjusted to the darkness, he noted that he was in an antechamber before the facility proper. The large doors sagged on rusted hinges and were flanked on either side by surprisingly intact torches. Carefully, he pulled one down and waved his hand over the bulb, causing it to erupt in flames. With the torch held high, he examined the doors, which gaped at the top. Using his free hand, he grasped the solid metal, and after several choice curses and yanks, the door creaked open enough to squeeze through. As he stepped over the wreckage, he saw more torches in this room as well. He flicked an ember from his fingertips, and they all ignited in unison. After motioning outside to his companions, Lauren and Bastion hurried towards him, each wielding their light pads. Lark first set foot into the facility, with Bastion followed by Lauren, bringing up the rear. An unspoken consensus for silence and caution ensured there would be no distractions or mistaken surprises as they explored. When they entered the main chamber, Bastion gasped audibly as he saw piles of bones strewn across the floor. 4 skeletons in crude armor lay lifelessly next to old, rusted swords. He knelt beside one and carefully scanned it with his pad, carefully not touching it. Guards, Lark informed them as he peered through the doorways. There were 3 off the main chamber. Withered built specifically to defend the facility. He called back to Lauren. I'm going to go check the other rooms to make sure there is no one around. You two, stay here and make sure the exit is clear, if we have to leave in a hurry. Without waiting for a response, he disappeared into the shadows. Bastion shot Lauren a wry smile. I thought you were in charge when the captain was absent. Lauren folded her arms and feigned indignation. I'll pull rank if I must, but part of being in charge is knowing when to take a step back. He knows the dangers better than we do, so he can call the shots for now. She examined the wall beside her, paying extra attention to a set of shackles welded into the wall. She grunted in disapproval, before looking back and seeing another identical set on the opposite wall. They were used for prisoners. Lark practically materialized at her side as he voiced answers to thoughts she hadn't spoken yet. Her hand reached for her weapon as she jumped in surprise. Seeing it was only him provoked loud grumbling as she reholstered her weapon. Why would they have prisoners in an underground facility? She asked as she took several deep breaths to calm her heart back down. He scowled. They're always ready to detain, interrogate, and torture at any given time. On top of that, prisoners were made to suffer from entropy madness while they were captive. It sounds horrific. What is it? Bastion approached the other set of shackles with a frown. Necromancers can use their magic to force a person into a state of psychosis. They become wild and are consumed with rage, fear, paranoia, and they experience a complete loss of control. It can be turned on or off at the caster's will, but thankfully, it can only affect one person at a time, Lark explained. Lauren and Bastion exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lauren realized that nothing their enemies back home did was as cruel as entropy madness, and the thought sent chills down her spine. Lark motioned to the doorways behind him with the torch in his hand. 3 collapsed chambers back here, but nothing dangerous. Bastian glanced at Lauren, who nodded, and they moved on to explore. At one time, each chamber had walls to separate it from the others, but they were long gone. Giant holes tore through each section, leaving exposed metal alloy edges and crossbeams. It was as though something literally tore the place apart. The room to the farthest left seemed the most stable. The ceiling was crunched down as though a great weight had been sat on it, and rocks had poured in through the cracks in the metal. They slowly walked in, on constant alert for every creak and crumble. The living quarters were here, Lark stated, as he stood on a boulder that lay on the splintered remains of a bed frame. The middle room was their lab, and the last room on the right was for food preparation, storage, and supplies. There were other rooms, but they're buried under so much rock that I can't tell what they were. If you have no objections, I'll investigate through the rubble here for personal belongings. I will search the lab and review the records, Bastian offered. Which leaves me to search the storeroom, Lauren finished. Be careful not to move any large debris, and give a holler if you find anything. Once on his own, Bastian carefully entered the lab where papers and furniture fragments were strewn about. A twisted skeleton was slumped against the doorframe, and a rapid scan showed it was a cruelly mutated version of the same wizard they had seen before. With a disgusted grunt, he made to stand. But a pile of papers, tucked beneath the remains of a table, caught his eye. The documents, while old, were still in fair condition, and the text was only slightly faded. Clearing a spot on the floor for himself, he sat cross-legged and began to leaf through the stack of documents. The text was somewhat familiar, and showed yet another mysterious connection between their two worlds that he was still trying to sort out. He arched a brow at the archaic jargon as he put his linguistics classes to full use and slowly read the documents. He never recalled seeing anything like this at the Sosarian Royal Library. His heart sped up at the thrill that he might have stumbled on a new discovery. He moved to his knees and cleared as large of a clean space as possible to examine the documents, laying each one carefully in the order he had found them. He slowly tried to translate each line while attempting to keep the hand holding his light still. Nearly an hour later, Lark was about to give up on finding anything among the bones and destroyed beds. A loud cry pierced the silence, and without thinking he vaulted over a large boulder and dashed back towards his companions. He entered the remains of the laboratory, sword in hand and essence magic coating his weapon. Searching around frantically, he saw only Bastian on all fours reading a laid-out group of papers. Lauren entered from the other side with her weapon drawn in a battle cry. When she saw no threat, she holstered her weapon and glared at her crewmate in irritation. "This is incredible!" Bastian's exultations echoed through the ruined building. "What?" Lark demanded, exasperated as he sheathed his blade. "This text, it's incredible!" Bastian marveled without turning his attention away from the paper. Lauren rubbed her forehead and groaned quietly. Lark looked back and forth between the excited historian and his objects of obsession before realization dawned on him. "You can read that?" "Yes!" Bastian's voice trembled as he almost lovingly laid the pages down. "It's an obscure dialect, with some drastic changes to verb usage. But it's the same written language that our progenitors used." Lark turned to Lauren with a silent request to elaborate, but her expression mirrored his own confusion. "Our people settled on Soledad over 1,000 years ago," Bastian explained, as he slowly stacked the pages on top of each other. "And for reasons we don't know, they destroyed all of their technology and any mention of where they came from." He extended his arms to gesture over the gathered documents. "We have texts of the written language they used, and it has a lot in common with this." "But that's impossible," Lark said skeptically, as he knelt and carefully looked at one of the papers. "This is the script of the Conclave. It's completely different from our language, and no one has ever been able to translate it. How could it be the same language of your ancestors?" "I don't know," Bastian admitted, as he reached down to gingerly adjust the corner of one paper to line up with its neighbor. "So far, I have only been able to translate a short historical record about your people's arrival on the planet and subsequent scattering across the continent." Lark's jaw fell open, and he asked quietly, "What do you mean, arrival on the planet?" "I'm sure that answer is here, but I want to finish translating this on the ship first. I need a clean environment with plenty of light and access to our information database." Bastian's voice grew insistent. Lark stared ahead, still struggling to process the news. If we can contact Cesaria, they could show you other documents we've recovered from the Conclave. We have no idea what they say, so if you agree to share the information, we could all learn a lot from this. Let's do that then, Lauren chimed. We'll collect what we can here, and you can send them a message when we get back to the ship. They don't want to hear from me, Lark seethed bitterly. You'll have much better luck if Bastion or the captain himself contacts them. All right, Lauren glanced at the wreckage around her. Is there anything else we need to collect or worry about? Everything else here is dead and worthless, Lark observed. One of their experiments broke free and tore the place apart before escaping. It was probably that huge worm we killed. She tilted her head towards the large collapsed exit through the back wall. It looks as though it burrowed out of here. Bastion did a final search for loose papers before gathering what he had and heading back to the Forerunner with Lauren in tow. With one last glance around, Lark began the long walk back towards the ship. Although the origins of his people weighed heavily on his mind, the renewed realization that the Conclave could create such a monster without the use of their magic deeply troubled him. Angel groaned as she looked at the time yet again. Bastion was late to take over in the drive room, and she was eager to get back to her quarters. It was her first evening off since she and Lark first spent the night together, and she kept bouncing between anxiety and excitement. She nearly leaped out of her seat when she heard the door slide open. A cry of happiness died in her throat as she turned to see a perturbed Reynard standing behind her with his arms folded. I thought you were my replacement, she murmured dejectedly, turning back to her station in a huff. I am. He folded his arms and went over to check the Nova Drive readout before turning back to Angel. Bastion is busy translating the Conclave documents, so I was drafted to take his place. His voice had an edge of irritation to it. I'm sorry, she attempted to soothe. Did you have plans with Lily tonight? I did, and when I told her I'd have to cancel, she got sullen and refused to talk to me. Last I saw, she was elbow deep in the kelp tanks. You don't have to do this, Angel offered, and stepped towards him. I was going to have dinner with Lark, but we can do it another time. Reynard drummed his fingers on his biceps. You two are spending a lot of time together. Is it serious? Her cheeks flushed, and she almost said it wasn't any of his business. However, his harmless curiosity combined with her guilt about his ruined plans compelled her to answer. I don't know. Maybe? We're still figuring that out. His eyes lit up, and he grinned as he practically pushed her out of the door. That changes things then. Go ahead and have dinner with him. It's the least I can do after he saved Lily's life. Her jaw dropped, and she was taken aback by his sudden reversal. She had difficulty finding the words to thank him, and in the end decided the best way to do it was to make the most of the time he had given her. She practically ran out of the drive room and gleefully saw no notifications on her pad. She was well and truly free for the night. She came to a stop in front of her quarters, and took a second to smooth out her hair and uniform in front. Lark had voiced curiosity in the many books she kept, and she had told him he could peruse them in inner quarters while he waited for her to be done. She opened the door and expected to see him comfortably sprawled on her bed with one, but to her amazement, he had done something completely different with his time alone. A table and chairs were set up in the center of the room. The lights were dimmed, yet illuminated two plates on opposite sides of the table. They were covered with opaque domes, but the smell wafting from them was amazing. Lark sat in the chair furthest from her as he read one of her books on mythology, with the help of a datapad to translate. I thought we were going to have dinner in the mess hall, Angel asked as she shut the door behind her. She sat in the open seat and gazed across the table at him expectantly. He set the book down and pulled the cover from her dish first. Breaded cutlets were fried golden brown, and she could see the speckles of fresh herbs in the crust. A rich red sauce slathered the meat, then topped with melted cheese. Noodles were carefully arranged underneath, so that one could get the perfect bite with each forkful. Since they had no fresh poultry on board, Angel realized this had to be freshly made from a species native to Durance. Lark uncovered his own plate and motioned for Angel to start eating. I had a lot on my mind, so I thought I would cook our meal and surprise you with a more intimate setting. Angel almost dropped her knife and looked at him in surprise. You made this? Field rations made from kelp lose their appeal fast, So when I was training, I begged my mother to teach me how to cook. And then I taught myself more as I got older, he answered. Impressive, she praised as she sliced up her meat. What did you have on your mind? Everything Bastian claimed about those documents. He nimbly twirled the fork in his hand. I suspected there were secrets about our past with the Conclave, but I'd never thought there would be such a connection between our world and yours. I'm almost afraid to find out what else he might discover. So, you decided to cook a Parmesan dish to distract yourself? She asked with a bemused smirk. Tarn told me it's a popular dish from your world, he replied. Normally, I would train or read up on recon reports, but I wanted to do something for you as well. So I prepared dinner to take my mind off of things. She took a large bite and leaned back in her chair to slowly savor the taste. This is delicious, she complimented. I'm glad you're happy with it, Lark said with a bright smile. I have something else for you, too. He pulled a fist-sized object from his pocket and passed it across the table to her. It was a rock. Confused, Angel gingerly picked it up, unsure of what to say until she turned it over and saw brilliant colors coming from a large crack in its face. This is a geode, an opal geode, she exclaimed, running her fingers over the greens and blues glimmering from the crevices. Where did you get this? I found it when we were coming back from the facility, he said, with extreme pleasure from her reaction. We call them spellstones. The stonekin have legends about earth magic bursting out from rocks like this one, turning them into beautiful gems. Thank you so much, she whispered as she looked around, already thinking about where to keep it in her room. She placed it beside her plate and took his hand in hers. Is this how you court a lover in Sosaria? She asked coyly. He ran his thumb over her fingers and shook his head. Usually, courtship involves a long process with parental permissions, scheduled chaperone dates, and having all sorts of drama when things don't go perfectly well. He rolled his eyes. In the end, I never had the time or patience for it. Sounds similar to what we have back home, she replied with a chuckle. I didn't socialize much, so my rare chances for courtship had to do with chance meetings and silent hopes that things would be different this time. Sensing the sudden air of melancholy coming from his dining companion, Lark squeezed her hand. Tell me more about your home. Angel stood from her seat to retrieve a large book. She moved her chair to sit beside Lark and opened it to a large map. Soledad is mostly water, much like your world, she began, running a finger along the edges of the page. But unlike your single large continent, we have three, with a smattering of island chains between them. So your people settled separately, as ours did? Lark inquired as he examined the map. Yes, I'm from Estede, here in the east. She pointed over the largest continent, along with Bastion, Maya, and Lily. To the north is Kindrest, where Lauren and Reynard are from. Then here to the south is Ilnara, where Akron, Tarn, and Dravik are from. Lark studied the map carefully, nodding slowly. Estede is mostly large cities, filled with industry, residential areas, and schools, Angel continued. The northern part, where I grew up, is cold most of the year. Long winters full of snow and rain, with short and intense summers. She smiled whimsically and looked at him. Summer was my favorite part of the year, reading outside by the beach or out exploring the forest. Summer, winter, he mused. Akron mentioned something about your planet having a rotation of seasons. You don't have that here? Angel asked. Lark continued to study the book. No, the temperature goes up and down somewhat, depending on the time of year, but nothing as drastic as what I've heard about your home. I would love to see these places for myself someday. He slid a slow arm around her waist. Maybe someday you can. She gave him a slight nudge and a gentle kiss. He responded eagerly, and she found herself pulled into his lap. When they broke apart, he nuzzled her cheek and drew her once more into a conversation about her homeworld. They continued talking long into the night, and when they were too tired to speak, he held her in his arms as she fell asleep. With a content sigh, she thought it was the best date she'd ever had. And that brings us to the end of chapter 14. So, as always, there's a lot happening in each of these chapters. This one we started off and saw the the big damned worm, um, which I think we're all familiar with the source reference there, but it was well played out. Everybody loves a giant aggressive worm. And then we had the startling revelation from Bastion that I think was pretty well telegraphed. There was enough hints dropped, the breadcrumbs trailed were there, but to have it all out and open like that was nice. I think that's the sort of recurring trope you see in a lot of sci-fi, but it's always interesting, catching a mysterious link between worlds that are somehow, some way left there. It works especially in this case because neither of the characters' home planets are their actual original home planets. Yes, the brain rot is absolutely real. But yeah, it works here. It reminds me of, well, I mean, there's a lot of things, but you get like the precursors in a lot of different stories. Like it's in StarCraft. You've got it at the Alien series. So it's not untread ground, but it's interesting how it plays out. And like I said, it works especially here because neither Soledad or now I can't remember the local planet's name. I'm awful with names. But Durance, thank you. Is that since neither are their respective home planets, they're both transplants to those. It kind of adds to the mystery there. So it works. And you're right. The call out to modern dating, it was a little on the nose. It's a little hard to meet people these days. Especially if you start factoring in the prevalence of apps these days. So it's understandable to be frustrated. But yeah, Akamos is definitely it's a relatively common trope because it's so engaging. It catches the imagination and you latch onto it and it makes you want to know more. So we've mentioned it earlier in our readings that tropes aren't bad. They're common for good reason. They're useful literary tools to catch your reader's interest and to develop your own world building. And the way you twist and manipulate those tropes is the important part. And so far we've seen it. It's interesting and it's caught our attention here. We're talking about it now. So yeah. But I will have to say, it is now 10 o'clock. And I do have to work in the morning. So I can't run much longer. So we'll go ahead and end on this chapter for the evening. We are right about at the halfway point of the book. We're at the start of chapter 15. My reader shows about 49% through. So we are probably about 3 sessions left to get through. Maybe 4 if we give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room. So probably about this time next week, we'll be able to finish the book. Our next scheduled reading is Tuesday night. I do have regular time off on Monday. My schedule is posted on Bluesky. As always, I encourage everyone to check out the author's Linktree. They've got their Bluesky listed there, as well as links to the storefront where you can buy a copy of the book yourself. So I encourage you to follow along there and give them your best. It's been a lot of fun reading this so far, and it's been wonderful having them here for these readings. And I hope very much that everyone will continue to join us as we finish out with this book over the course of the next week. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for joining us once again, and have a great night. Thanks, guys.